I just really appreciate the way the chairman showed how it's in our interest as human beings to take the place alongside the majority of the world's people in bringing this thing down under the leadership of the African working class. That's where our future lies. There's no future under imperialism, even for white people.
I know, and I hear, on some pundits and some people, summing up what's happening around the world, where there's just incredible resistance going on, and even inside of Europe, and now even inside of Israel, interestingly, what's going on there. And they're saying, what's wrong with America? Why don't Americans do this, quote unquote? Well, the reason why is because of the existence of the African population as a colonized population inside this country, that we sit on the pedestal of African oppression. It obscures our class relationship with our own ruling class. And so we adopt it. We adopt the ideology of the ruling class, sometimes better than the ruling class does itself, because like the chairman said, they have no loyalty. They're bailing out. They see that resources are drying up, that people are taking back their land and their self-determination, and they can't just go in and steal the oil and diamonds anymore. They have to fight for it. So they're filling their own pockets with everything that they can get. Half of them are moving to Shanghai and to Beijing and other places around the world. They say it blatantly. We see the ascendancy being Asia, being China, being Japan. We're not staying with this sinking ship. But they're still, they're bailing out, but they're not helping you. More and more white people are going to be feeling this crunch of this decline of imperialism. But the answer isn't to try to save the stolen land for us. The answer is to join the rest of the people on the planet, to stand in solidarity, bring this sucker down, this vicious imperialism down. It's got to go once and for all. You want security? Get rid of imperialism. You want prosperity? Get rid of a blood-sucking system that has the top 1% owning 99% of the resources of the money in this country. Get rid of that. Get rid of that. Get rid of it where a few have everything at the expense of the majority of the people. What we have to do is realize that we have no future in imperialism ourselves unless we want to go down with it. If we want a future, if we want security, if we want true prosperity, then we have to join the rest of the world. We have to be part of winning other white people just like ourselves. Because I don't care, I hear people talking about, well, this government's corrupt. But you know what? The government's not corrupt. I mean, imperialism was like that from day one. It's born that way. There's no better, can we go back to the good old days? That was when hundreds of millions of indigenous people were being slaughtered daily. That's when indigenous, whole islands like Haiti of indigenous people were wiped out in 40 years, in 20 years. That's when a whole continent of people, of African people, were enslaved and kidnapped and enchained and worked to death for generations. What are you talking about? The good old days of capitalism. You're talking about blatant. It's only been the struggles for national liberation of the people on the planet Earth that have made it so that imperialism can't always be as blatant anymore. It just, with impunity, did whatever it wanted to do in the past because there was nobody to criticize them. They wiped out millions and millions of people, and now, again, this is part of the people around the world gaining their voice, becoming the subjects of history. And I just think that for us as white people to see a future in this is crazy. It is just crazy. There's no way that anybody's going to have a future in here. Like we've been saying, the whole earth is in upheaval. And I was just reading an article last night of how in the mid-Atlantic states of the U.S., like Pennsylvania, Virginia, North Carolina, all the trees are dying from pollution. They're just getting this canker and these different kind of diseases of trees. Who's going to fix that? When the indigenous people were here, the trees were incredible. There was no problem with that. So what we have to do is look for our future with the people on the planet, to find our humanity in that. And that's what this movement and this African People Solidarity Committee gives us the ability to do, to really begin to have a principled relationship to African people and everybody else, and to be able to go back into the white community and take this on, you know, inside the belly of the beast, to be able to you know, become the vulnerable spot, the Achilles heel of imperialism, of people inside the white community who stand in solidarity with African people and want to see the reparations, working for the reparations to African people.
Uhuru.
Uhuru. So we have a couple of things actually that we're going to be discussing today on this show, and one of them is this recent study on the increase of the wealth gap between African people and white people in this country, where now white people have 20 times the wealth of the African population in this country. 20 times. It's greater than it's ever been. I think they've been keeping records on this for the last 20 years, and it's greater. It's increased. Mm-hmm. In 1984, the difference in the wealth gap was that white people had 12 times the wealth that Africans do. In 2011, white people have 20 times the wealth of Africans. Yeah, and this is supposed to be the recession, you know, when the wealth of white people was supposed to have decreased. Yeah. So what it shows is that African and Mexican people are bearing the brunt of this economic crisis so clearly. So we wanted to hear a clip. I wanted to actually play this clip from Democracy Now! Because it has some information in it, but we also want to critique it, because I have a lot of serious struggle with how the politics of Democracy Now! Are laid out and what the politics actually are. Mm-hmm. And its apology for U.S. imperialism. But I would just like, this give some facts, and then I'd like to have a discussion summing it up.
Look at a before and after set of snapshots from 2005 to 2009. In 2005, the wealth gap ratios were roughly 10 to 1, and they doubled to 20 to 1. So they were already big, and they got even bigger. So what happened? The main driver of these disparate impacts was the housing market. Blacks and Hispanics have fewer financial assets. Wealth is a combination of all your assets, your home, your car, your 401k, your stocks if you have them, minus all your debts, your mortgage, your car loan, your student loan, your credit card. The financial portfolio of blacks and Hispanics are much more dependent on their housing wealth than on anything else. They don't have much else. So when the housing market tanked, as it started to in 2006, it disproportionately impacted blacks and Hispanics. On top of that, there was a regional impact. The housing market rose higher and fell more steeply in certain sections of the country.
That was Paul Taylor of the Pew Research Center. According to Pew's new report, Latinos and African Americans have been particularly hard hit by the recession. In 2009, white households had a median net worth of just over $113,000. In stark contrast, Latinos had $6,300 and African Americans had not quite $5,700. Between 2005 and 2009, whites lost 16% of their median net worth, but Latinos lost 66%. Black households 53%, and Asians, who topped white households in 2005, dropped 54%. To discuss the growing wealth gap and what it means, we're joined by Roderick Harrison of Howard University, sociologist, demographer, and former chief of racial statistics at the Census Bureau. Professor Harrison, welcome to Democracy Now! Talk about the significance of what we're seeing. Between blacks and whites, we're talking 20 to 1 in the wealth gap?
It really takes us back to a period where, characterized by the Kerner Commission as two societies separate and unequal. This is a chasm that just is striking, and the drops, the effects of the recession, the two-thirds loss in Hispanic wealth, the cutting black wealth in half. You usually don't see cuts that dramatic. This is really suggesting just how hard the recession and the collapse of the housing market has hit these two minority populations.
Uhuru, I mean, first of all, I just want to say that I have a serious problem with the show Democracy Now! And with the politics of Amy Goodman, because she is an open apologist for imperialism. She's a functionary of the Democratic Party, very clearly, and she loved Barack Obama until it became a little less, cool to, until people began to expose more broadly who Obama was and is, and she supports imperialism, and she has a line of racism, that the problem is racism. And to say that, as one of her guests did there, that this is a return to a time of separate but unequal, well, when wasn't it? When wasn't it? This just shows the fact that Africans are colonized inside the U.S. And what are we supposed to say? That I think, as Glenn Ford has pointed out, in 500 years, at a certain, if you do the math, that Africans would catch up at the rate that things are going now. I mean, that's absurd. That's ridiculous. That flies in the face of the reality inside this country of the relationship between North American and African people.
I want to read a little bit more from the same interview on Democracy Now! With Roderick Harrison. He says, quote, "Any hopes or aspirations, particularly based solely on Obama's election, that we had reached some kind of post-colonial state were close to delusional. The socioeconomic realities have not changed on the ground, and this report is pointing to just how much the socioeconomic inequalities have been exacerbated by the recession and the poor economy. It has hit, as it historically does, lower income minorities much more heavily than others, and this report has shown very graphically the consequences of this. So, the sense that perhaps the willingness to elect the first black president does suggest some degree of importantry of moving beyond race in our society. Clearly that doesn't change the kind of socioeconomic realities that are the consequences of centuries and decades of inequality."
So, I mean, that's just ridiculous. I mean, first of all, the African People's Socialist Party and the International People's Democratic Uhuru movement have struggled from day one, have challenged Obama, exposed who Obama is. He's white power and blackface. He is a result of the crisis of imperialism. He has been put in to be able to carry out the agenda of imperialism as it's always been carried out, even to intensify it, which he has done, but to do it not seeing a white man, not seeing George W. Bush up there, but to see somebody, as the chairman says, who looks like the majority of the people on the planet. So there was no hope or change, and the party said that from the very beginning of Obama's campaign. It was very clear that the Democratic Party is not a revolutionary party. It is not in the interests of the African community. It is there to continue the status quo. And, and I think that what's so offensive about Democracy Now! Is to bring out something today that has to do with just conditions that, yeah, they are deepening with the crisis of imperialism, but it's no different than anything at any time of history. Tell me when this gap wasn't there. I mean, it was there in one form or the other. It is colonialism. Mm-hmm. There are 2.5 million people in prison, and at least half of them are African. There is a huge gap in the unemployment rate and in just the ability of Africans to even work in this country, to have jobs. And the income rate is, I think Africans make 50 cents for every dollar that white people make. I mean, this has always been there. And we have to recognize that the problem is colonialism.